Welcome back to another episode of the Isn't That Rich podcast. I'm Ashley McVicker, joined by my co-host Jill Franks and her sister-in-law, Shannyn Olson, who is a new mom, and we are so excited for her. And today she is going to be telling us the cost of giving birth. Wow, there's many joys that come with birth, but there's also many bills that probably lots of moms have learned about. So thank you so much for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for being here, Shannon. And you know firsthand, because this experience is really new for you. You're a first-time mom, and you're still probably receiving a lot of the hospital bills and all the other expenses that come with having a new baby. So welcome on, and we're excited to hear your story.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to talk about my experience and share this for other new parents who may be going through the same thing or might be thinking about family planning, so they can kind of anticipate this. Because I think the last thing that you want to do when you have a new kid and you're learning about, you know, how to be a parent or how to be a parent to, you know, your second kid or third kid is worry about your finances. So the more you can do to set yourself up in advance, I think that you can take a little bit of that stress off of you and your family ahead of time.
Right, because I would say it obviously doesn't start when you give birth or after birth. It starts far before that.
Right.
Yeah, family planning in itself has a lot of expenses. So,
Yeah.
So tell me, Shannon, you're a new mommy. How has it been for you these past 4 months? So Locke, your new baby boy, is 4 months old this week,
I think
right?
it's actually today.
Yeah,
I think he turned 4 months today.
Aww.
Yeah, super exciting.
Yeah.
It's been, I think, the most rewarding thing that I've ever done, and also the hardest thing at the same time.
Like that's what everyone says.
Yeah.
So it's for sure across for sure.
You hear that and you think, you feel you know, but you don't know until you're in it.
Uh-huh.
It's one of those things where it's like, I have to apologize to every other one of my friends who's had kids
Yeah.
prior to this, because like I just didn't understand until I was in it. But it's like, all the new things, like not sleeping through the night all the time, figuring out, why he's upset, or all those different things that you're picking up along the way, all just are worth it, when you go see him and he sees your face and he gives you like a giant smile and your heart just melts and you're like, whatever you need, mommy, I'll figure it out.
I love that.
Yeah. So what were some initial planning steps that you and your husband Brandon took before having this beautiful baby boy when it comes to like finances and just getting prepared for?
Yeah. So I think the first thing, especially when we're talking about like child birth costing, is to really understand your insurance. And if you're even thinking about family planning, normally the enrollment time is sometime in the fall. So take a look and figure out what's going to be best for your family. So, if you're employed, how does your insurance work? What are the different insurance options that your employer has? Often there'll be a different choice. And then same thing with your spouse. And so it could make sense for you to be on your own insurance and your spouse to be on different insurance, or you to be on the same insurance, but kind of look at what those different options are, because very, very likely the year that you give birth, you're going to hit kind of your out-of-pocket max, which is the most that you would pay, and then your insurance will pick up the rest for your kind of in-network service. So in our case, we were fortunate enough to have 2 working parents, and my partner is actually on a different insurance, because what I didn't want to have happen is have his addition to my insurance come out into our out-of-pocket max.
Right.
And so it made more sense for him to keep his own insurance through the employer, and then for me to be on my own. And then something we didn't think about ahead of time, but I kind of wish we had, was also to think about when the child is born, you have 30 days to put them on an insurance plan. And it counts as a life event. So you don't have to wait for enrollment. You do it at the time that they are born. But looking ahead of time, because I had to do a lot of research like right after we were born, and it would have been nice to just know. But if you're family planning during that enrollment period, kind of play around with those numbers and be like, what would it cost to have him on my insurance or my husband's insurance? What does that coverage look? What is our new out-of-pocket max? And then realize that that's coming. Like as soon as you add them to your insurance, that out-of-pocket max goes up for the family out-of-pocket max. So for this year, I've hit my out-of-pocket, but for my son, he still has bills that we're paying for because he has his new out-of-pocket max as well.
Right. Isn't that so funny that a baby has like insurance and they have their own out-of-pocket
Yeah,
max?
that was his first meal. I mean, his first meal was a hospital bill.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, that's a little sad, but
Yeah.
So much about insurance. Let's just start from the beginning with like everything before the birth. So prenatal care, all of your appointments. Like, do you know the cost of what all that was?
Yeah, so
I have to look it up.
I took a look. I had to go back because we have great insurance. A lot of it was covered. I did take a look, and I think the first important thing is to understand if your doctor is in network or not, or to research doctors that are in network, because that can make a big difference with your overall cost. So we had found someone that we liked that was in network, and so fortunate for us, a lot of it was covered. I did look up the cost of I went back and looked at the claims.
Perfect.
And kind of took a look. So you'll start visiting your OBGYN around 8 to 12 weeks. And then we had monthly visits after that point. I did have a geriatric pregnancy, meaning I'm over 35. So mine were a little bit more frequent than some people's maybe. And I looked up, and each one of those was about $300 to $400, but that was all covered by insurance. And then on top of that, you might have blood work, you might choose to do genetic testing, and so on and so forth. So
did you do any of that?
We did. I didn't go back and look at like each individual like testing, but that adds up.
I imagine that would be rather expensive, is why I
Right.
asked that. 'Cause some people don't have the luxury to do those things if they wanted to go through with that. 'Cause I know
Right.
some people don't.
Yeah.
And so the 300 to 400 was just the doctor's cost, and then the testing would be on top of that. I do think the labs were generally not as expensive as the OB visit,
Right.
but you know, they do add on to that as well, including like, I know we might talk about ultrasounds and stuff as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so for your pregnancy, you said you went more frequently. How often were you going to these appointments? Was it monthly? Was it every 2 weeks? Or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the pregnancy, and when I say that, I mean through the second trimester, I went once every month, and then I developed high blood pressure. I'm someone who never had high blood pressure my entire life. I generally had low blood pressure, but I ended up developing hypertension that third trimester, and so then I would go in once or twice a week just to get my blood pressure tested. Wow. They called it like a stress test, basically monitoring me and baby to make sure that everyone was still doing okay. And then that added, you know, extra visits on there as well. So you can kind of plan for a normal pregnancy, but sometimes these things happen and you can't really prepare for it. So understanding too that that's part of pregnancy and part of the journey as well is something to be aware of.
Yeah, definitely. Things that are out of your control that might come up. And you also had a set induction date. Is that correct too?
Yes.
So you kind of knew your end game, I guess. And that's kind of something different than a typical pregnancy. Is not often you're kind of waiting at that 9-month, 10-month period. Like you could go at 38 weeks, you could go right at 40 weeks, but you knew your date.
We did know our date. Yeah. So because I had hypertension, they induced as soon as they felt the baby was at full term.
Yes.
And I might get this wrong. I thought it was 37 weeks. So we knew the date, but also something that comes into play with cost. So if we talk about medical bills, the induction costs money, and that's something that was on our itemized bill as well. So, you know, if you are waiting, it's not necessarily like more expensive or less expensive. It might just be like, you know, you kind of get what you're going to get, and you hopefully have good insurance kind of set up ahead of time. But it's something where you won't necessarily know what it's going to be until you actually get there.
Yeah.
So because you were going more frequently to the doctor, did your insurance work where maybe because a typical patient would only go once every month, did they cover like your extra visits every time?
Yeah, all of that was covered through insurance.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think too, if you ever have questions, you know, we, as I said, fortunately we had everything covered, but if you ever have questions too, you can call the number on your insurance card and kind of talk through those procedures. Like don't ever feel, like you just have to do something. If you talk with your doctor about different procedures, especially if there's something out of the norm or if there's different options, kind of talk about that. You can talk to your insurance provider and they can walk you through like what they think that estimate's going to be if it's something that you're really concerned about. But I would generally say, I would imagine most insurance companies will generally cover your kind of prenatal care appointments and whatnot, as long as it's something that's like non-elective and like part of a typical pregnancy.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So good.
So you got induced and that was covered under insurance?
Yes. Well, I will say,
I feel like talking about insurance, you're like, yes, but.
no, but kind of.
kind
I
of.
will say, I don't necessarily, I assume that it was covered by insurance. So what happens when you go into the hospital is you'll get like the overall bill for your stay, and then it'll have items on there.
It's like a hotel bill.
It's like a hotel bill.
They're like, did you drink the soda out of the refrigerator?
Don't use that bandage because they'll charge you for it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say like don't turn down care necessarily, but this is where really understanding your out-of-pocket max plays in, because what ends up happening is that bill, and I can pull up what that looked like, but I looked up the overall bill was $43,000 for me.
Okay.
I ended up paying $3,100 because what'll happen is I hit my out-of-pocket max, and it's like, okay, you're not going to pay more than that for the year. So, I could have stayed another 5 days, and because it was in network and it was part of the coverage, the insurance company would pick up all that.
Wow.
So once again, understand how your insurance works. I wouldn't want to turn down care, especially if it's something you or your child needs.
Yeah.
Because you'll end up only just paying what your out-of-pocket max is for the year.
So you were $43,000 and you were there how many days?
I think we were there for 5 days. Yeah. So what ended up happening, so we had a vaginal birth, and I know there's a difference of cost for C-section versus vaginal. We were there for 5 days, but because I had hypertension, and I don't know if it was just like lack of sleep or whatever, normally when you give birth, that number comes down. But for me, it took a couple extra days, and it was just like borderline too high. And so they ended up giving me some medication for it, and then you have to wait 24 hours and make sure that your blood pressure will come back down. So I was just not quite getting there. And so we ended up staying a little bit longer. And so that ended up adding a couple days to our birthing journey as well.
But you didn't have to pay anymore.
We did not have to pay anymore. Yeah.
Well, and this is something people don't consider too, is if you need to stay in the hospital longer and if the baby needs to stay in the hospital longer. So were you released earlier than your son, or were you released at the same time? Because that doesn't always line up.
Right.
Yeah.
We were released at the same time. And it was actually interesting because first he had low glucose. So he was the reason we were staying extra.
Yes.
And then I had the high blood pressure. And so I was the reason we were staying extra. But you go through together and they release you at the same time. You definitely don't want to be separated from your baby in that critical time. And I did look it up, just the stay alone. So we're not talking any tests, any materials or anything like that. Just the stay alone for the nursery was $2,400 a day. And then for baby. And then for mom was $4,100 a day for mom. So you add that up. Once again, like we weren't necessarily paying that amount. So I don't want to freak people out about those numbers, but knowing how your insurance works, having insurance if you're family planning is really critical. And so I think just knowing that those are the numbers that are out there is important to know.
Well, and if you don't have insurance, just having a ballpark of what those numbers could be a day. Because sometimes, and I think there's different things if you don't have insurance, but also like that's not a cheap number. Right. So it's not going to be a cheap thing.
Well, and I will say this too, I'm not an expert, and obviously this is not my personal experience, but I do think too, if you don't have insurance, the amount that the hospital will bill you is lower. So what'll happen is like those numbers that I threw out there, those big numbers, those are the numbers that the hospital will submit to insurance, and then insurance will negotiate. So there'll be a number that says like, okay, the bill was $60,000, insurance discount, which is what insurance is negotiating with the hospital, might be like $40,000. So the bill is $20,000, then you might pay $3,000 and they pay $17,000. So, if you don't have insurance, it's not necessarily the same cost. And I do believe that you can go and call billing and negotiate too. So if you pay your bill in full versus having like a payment plan or whatnot, you can also sometimes negotiate those costs down. And if you don't have insurance too, a lot of times like look at that itemized bill, because they sometimes charge for things that didn't happen, or they'll double charge for things, and you don't want to get stuck with that.
No.
So unfortunately we didn't have that happen to us, but I've heard people have that experience as well.
Yes, I've heard that too. So just make sure you ask for the actual itemized list for your bill.
Right.
So good.
Golly.
I know, but things you wouldn't think of, you just... I imagine you and I going to the hospital and like, oh, we just think everyone's honest and that whatever you get the bill, that's what it is. And then, it's just, things happen. So,
well, it's probably not even dishonesty. It's probably it's so crazy and hectic. And there's a lot of moms. Like, I think, gosh, why we were there. I mean, they were having like maybe 19 births a day.
Yeah. So which one was attached to which time?
Oh yeah, like
so
I could
much.
see stuff getting double counted or multiple nurses coming into the room. Like I'm sure it's probably an honest mistake. But,
Yes.
I could see easily how that could happen.
Yeah.
So
just looking at, this is from my hospital bill. So I think another thing that people may not know is that when you go into the hospital and you give birth, you go in as one person, but you come out as two. So there's my hospital bill and then there's my son's hospital bill, and those are separate bills. You might also have like an anesthesiologist, and that might be a separate bill. Sometimes there's like a different doctor helping out with some of the pediatric care. So like we chose to get our son circumcised. That was a different bill because it was a different doctor. And so you might get several.
Gosh.
But kind of like the bulk of your stay, you're going to get two big bills, one's for your stay and one's for your child. So
can I ask you something really quickly?
Yeah.
So for each of those doctors, did you have to make sure all of those separate were in your network, or how did that work? Or was it kind of like you knew they already were? Because I wonder about that too.
And once again, this is not something I'm an expert in, but I believe that you have some protection that if they are not in network and you don't have a choice, that you can kind of work with your insurance provider in the hospital to figure that out. So
Good.
I think in our case, everybody was in network, and a lot of times with bigger kind of hospitals, that'll be the case. But I think there is some protection. If you have questions about that too, like talk to your doctor in their office, because one, they'll know who works in there, and then two, they can kind of talk to you about what some of those protections are. I just personally, I'm not an expert at it.
Yeah. I just wondered, like, how do you know?
Yeah. And why would another doctor be on a different network? But that is the thing that happens.
True, yeah.
And that's what's kind of scary about insurance in these bills is like, oh gosh, like that's the last thing you want to be worrying about when you just want to be loving on your child.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's always good to work through this stuff ahead of time to kind of.
Yeah. Once again, personal experience, like I gave birth in Ohio. I don't know if that's like an Ohio protection or if that's a protection everywhere too, or if that was a policy of the hospital. So if you're concerned about it, talk to the hospital.
All of the above.
Because they know how that works.
Yeah. So interesting. So in your case, it was all included.
It was all included, right?
Good. In network.
All inclusive stay, Jill.
Yeah, that's right.
So this is just for my bill. So the overall bill was $42,990.96. Insurance covered $39,924.83. So my personal bill was $3,000 or $3,066.13.
Okay.
And so what that came down to was room and board was $16,500. We had about $800 of pharmacy. Labs were $685. Anesthesia. So I chose to get an epidural. So the anesthesia, which I assume was $3,370. There was another about $2,000 of pharmacy. So that might have also been the epidural. Labor room and delivery was about $17,000. Observation and treatment was $2,000. Other diagnostic services were $700. And so all of that together was just my bill. And then for my son's bill, his was overall $11,386. Insurance covered $10,076.20. And so we paid, about $1,200 for him as well. So for him, his nursery was about $7,100. He had about $100 of pharmacy charges. He had labs, which were about $500. He had like a audiology, so they do like a hearing test, and that was $271. Some more pharmacy, which was $640. Treatment observation rooms was about $3,000. So once again, like we didn't pay for all of that, and insurance did cover a huge portion of it. But had that bill been over that $3,600, which is his out-of-pocket max, that's the max we would have paid.
Gotcha.
So we've hit my out-of-pocket max, and now we're working towards him.
His.
So hopefully we don't have to use it, and he stays healthy, and just has kind of more routine check-ins. But it is important to kind of know how your insurance works.
Yeah. That's so good.
Gosh,
lots of expenses.
Little Locke had a bill too.
Having a baby at the hospital. I know.
11 grand. Gosh.
I know. So that was kind of everything as far as your stay, giving birth, that whole process. But you still have to go in for postnatal care. So let's talk a little bit about your journey after you had Locke, because there was some stuff that came up for you and just bills with Locke and all that good stuff. So
yeah. So like I said, you go in as one person, you come out as two. So we'll kind of talk about my experience postpartum, and then we can kind of talk about his with pediatrics and whatnot. But with my postpartum, so normally you'll do a check-in at like 6 weeks postpartum. That one was like a simple office visit. And so it kind of was the same cost. For us, it was $0 because insurance had covered it. Plus we had met our out-of-pocket max. Now something like, once again, you can't predict what's going to happen. I actually had a postpartum hemorrhage at about 10 weeks, which is not something super uncommon. So I don't want to, or super common. So I don't want to freak anybody out. Yeah. But I had to be rushed to the ER. I had to get emergency surgery. And then I had to stay in the hospital for a little bit. And so talking about the bills with that, you'll have a ambulance bill. Yeah. You have the ER bill. I had a surgeon bill for the OBGYN and the anesthesiologist because I had to go under for it. Then I had the hospital stay on top of that. So
holy smokes.
It doesn't end at childbirth sometimes. Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah. And so hopefully this is not an experience that most people have, but that bill overall, and this doesn't include the ambulance and the ER bill because I didn't add that kind of up, but just my surgery bill alone was $61,000. We paid $0 because we had hit our out-of-pocket max. So we didn't pay for the ambulance. We didn't pay all those bills I just said. All I saw was that I had an insurance statement and my balance was $0 for all of those.
Wow. We're glad that it wasn't a New Year's Eve baby kind of a thing where you're having Locke on December.
Well, yeah, you just hit your out-of-pocket max.
Right.
Could you imagine? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, oh my gosh. True. So that was just the surgery bill.
That was just the surgery bill.
Ambulance is pretty expensive too. I'm pretty sure like.
I want to say, gosh, don't quote me on this one, but I want to say it was like $11,000.
That's what I was going to say.
About 10 usually. 10 to 11.
Yeah. And I'm fortunate for them. I mean, and if I didn't have insurance, I would pay it because it's the reason I'm still here.
Yeah.
And still able to take care of my son. So it's definitely worth it. But knowing your insurance, because you want to plan for these things, right? Like you want to know what's the most that I could pay and have that money set aside, whether it's because you have insurance or no insurance, or, I know we have a pretty low out-of-pocket max, but knowing what that number is so you can plan, in advance if you're family planning. Yeah.
So already one child, you're over $100,000 in bills. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, you had a medical incident afterwards, but still, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
I would not want to pay that out of pocket, $100,000.
No.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's very stressful having a baby just because you have a lot of new adjustments. You're learning how to be a parent. You're learning how to interact with your partner differently. You're learning how you respond to this baby. The last thing you want to be worrying about is financial stress on top of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Especially while you're trying to heal. Yes. Whether you had a C-section or vaginal delivery, both of those have a healing period. Mm-hmm. So your body's under a ton of stress. Like the last thing you want to be worrying about is money on top of that.
Absolutely. So you said post-pediatric care for Locke was the 6-week appointment. And I know you just had a visit this past week with him. And how often are you going? Is it that kind of the normal schedule, 6 weeks, and then each month?
6 weeks was me.
That was you. Okay.
Yeah, so I had a 6 week. And there actually isn't a lot of postpartum care on top of that normally. So it's literally like 6 weeks, and then you're like, okay, you're good to go.
Yeah.
That being said, if you want to go in and see your doctor more often, you absolutely should. But for pediatrics, he had a 1 week, a 2 week, a 1 month, a 2 month, a 4 month, and then he will have a 6 month. So he just turned 4 months today. We just had our appointment yesterday. It feels like forever ago.
I know. I was going to say that doesn't feel like yesterday.
And then his vaccinations were, I believe at 2 months and 4 months. I'd have to go back and look, but each one of those, so each one of those were covered by insurance. And they were about $300. So we didn't pay anything for that. We did go in one time because we thought he wasn't feeling well. It turns out he might just had a little bit of a cold, but we're new parents. So,
you worry.
We were worried. So we took him in, and that ended up having like $100 that were out of pocket for us. Yeah. But most of his care for like all the vaccinations, all of that was covered by insurance.
Great. That's so good. So now you have a beautiful, healthy baby. You're on your way to recovery from all of childbirth and all this stuff. And I guess we have some questions about how did you plan for all of this? Because, I mean, you guys worked really hard to set money aside. You knew you wanted a child. Like, you were planning this for a while. So what did budgeting and that look like for you?
Yeah. So I guess one thing we didn't talk about too is this is actually our second pregnancy. So we had a first pregnancy that we ended up having a miscarriage for. And so there are medical costs associated with that too. We were lucky enough to get pregnant naturally. So we didn't have to do
IVF or anything
like that too. But like realize that, you know, figure out how you feel about that ahead of time, look up and research the expenses, look up how much your employer may or may not help with that support.
Yes.
You know, ahead of time as you're doing family planning. So I would say like do research to understand what options are available. You know, does your employer help with some of these things? Really, really learn. I can't emphasize this enough. Learn how your insurance works. And you can talk to your insurance agent. You can talk to your HR department if you have one. Like, you're not the only person who's gone through this. There's probably lots of women where you work. Talk to other moms about their experience. Ask them the same kind of questions that we're talking about today. Like, if they're comfortable sharing, like, what was your bill? How'd you pay? You know, what was there anything you were surprised by? What did you do to prep? Like, especially if they work for the same company too, because they can kind of tell you how that process works. And I was lucky enough that our employer had a ton of literature on our web pages, so I was able to get what I need. But use your HR resources. They're there to help you. They want to make you successful. They want to make sure you have as seamless as you can an experience, because they want you to come back and not have the stress of finances on top of that. So do your kind of research ahead of time with the insurance.
Well, I would even say, like, with taking time off of work, that's a whole nother financial aspect that comes into play. Like, do you have anything to say about that? Whether it was like leaving for your appointments and having to take time off for that, or I don't know if you if you work remotely, yes, you would take off a time too. I've never worked remote. Do you work remote? I assumed you worked remote. I don't know why. We can take this out. She's like, what are you about to say?
This is a good question, because that is a huge financial impact.
You know what I'm saying? And then you're at least probably it's 6 weeks, right? After you have the baby, most of the time that you get to stay with the baby. So like, what does that look like for you financially? And were you paid to stay home with your baby? Or
I love that you asked this question, because there's a lot of things I didn't know about that I had to research. So I guess the first things first, understand what your company offers if you are a working mom. Understand like how much time off you get. Our company offers 4 months paid and 2 months unpaid if you want. If you choose the unpaid option, budget for that and think about what that means. So you're not going to have your salary for 2 months. You don't have to take the 2 months. You could take 2 weeks. You could take a month.
Okay.
But whatever period you take, you don't get your salary. And then you also have to cover the cost of your health insurance. So,
ooh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah. Because you don't get paid for 2 months. So it's something that we ended up having extra time, because I was able to get short-term disability because of our medical emergency and the fact that I was had a longer recovery period after that. So we ended up getting close to 6 months anyway. But you know, if we had a second child, that extra couple months, especially when they kind of start to be more aware and you get to have a different experience with them. You know, I talked to my partner and said, like, this is something I'd really like to budget for. So if we're going to start family planning for a second child, if that's something we choose, I want to look at that. I want to look at how much money we're making at the time. I want to look at how much that insurance would be, and figure out how we can have that money saved in advance. So that way we're not having to make a difficult decision of like going back sooner than I would like, if we can make that happen. So
yeah,
I'm glad you asked that question.
I was like, wow, I asked it very intensely.
Yeah. And then two, you know, it's not just you, it's your partner as well. So you can make decisions on how you want to spend his time. My partner unfortunately has, I believe it's 6 weeks. And what we did is the first month when our baby was born, he actually had saved up and taken vacation. So he took a month of vacation, not his paternity leave. And then when I go back to work, he is going to start his paternity leave. And that's something we chose to do for a couple reasons. One, it keeps him out of daycare longer. So for us, that's avoiding kind of like flu and RSV season. So there's some
also daycare costs.
Health benefit.
Gosh,
Daycare costs is a big one. And then also just as a working mom, you know, this is something I haven't experienced yet, but it was advice given to me by other moms, is that transition is really, really hard. And so knowing that like your spouse is at home and you're not just going like, bam, you're going back to work and he's going back to daycare immediately, is something that a lot of people recommend. And so he will take his 6 weeks when I go back in January, and then Locke will be home with dad and they'll get some bonding time when he's a little bit older. And then it helps me kind of transition back into my career. So it's not just hard cut off as well.
That's
so
nice. So you don't have to, I didn't realize you could kind of pick and choose when you take your maternity or paternity leave.
Yeah. Well, and you check with your company. So,
yes.
I mean, obviously if you have your baby, you probably want to take your maternity leave.
Well, yes, like you're not going to, I meant, I guess, paternity leave only.
And usually you have to take it continuously. So you can't like
take 3 weeks
take 3 weeks here and then like come back and be like, well, I want to take my bonding leave later.
You take like 6 weeks vacation throughout the year. Just like, I'm still on this.
Yeah, so I think it has to happen continuously, but check with your HR department. And then usually you have to use your benefits within a certain period. I think for us, it was a year after the birth. So you can even be like, hey, I'm going to be on my leave and then my parents are going to come for a month and then we're going to take paternity leave. So check with your employer, because I'm sure that differs between companies, but knowing that in advance can help you kind of understand what flexibility you have or don't have, because you don't want to lose out on those benefits as well.
Yeah, use them if you have them.
For sure. Any other bills you want to share with us, or is there anything else we're missing?
Not necessarily bills, but other things that I would love people who are family planning to think about. We don't have to go into a ton of depth about this, but 529 college planning.
Yes.
So basically a 529 is an investment account that you can use for education expenses. They don't have to be necessarily college. So there's benefits even if you can use it for trade school. You can use it for elementary school fees.
Yes.
There's a lot of benefits as well. And you don't have to wait for your baby to be born to open accounts. What you can do is you can change the name on the account like one time per year. So what we did is when we started family planning, we opened an account in my name and then we started putting money into it. And then as soon as our son was born, we moved it into his name. So you can start reaping the benefits and letting that money grow. And then he can use that for education expenses later. Or let's say you have multiple children and you don't necessarily, like one goes to trade school, you don't use all the amount you saved. You can then change the name, use it for a second child. Maybe, neither of them end up using all of that and you could give it to a grandchild or you can give it to a niece or nephew. Like you can transfer that money. So it's not necessarily just like lost. You could decide you want to go to art school. When you retire, you could use it for yourself again. And then they changed it recently so you can roll over some of that money into a Roth IRA as well. I think the limit is $35,000.
Yeah.
Check that.
It might be more in 2025, but right now it's the 35,000 that you can roll into that, which is great. I mean, what a great investment tool that you can transfer as you need it for your family. I think that's awesome.
And I think there's a ton of calculators online too if you're trying to figure out like how much do I need to save. So you can go on those calculators. There's free. I think I might have used one from NerdWallet. Yeah. And you can say like, hey, my child is going to be in school around this date. I want to save 30%. I want to be able to pay for 30%. I want to go to a private school. I want to go to a public school. And they can estimate based off of current inflation. Who knows what it's going to look like. You can change those numbers around to figure out like what you might want to save for. But then they can say, okay, your savings goal is $150 a month or $300 a month. And then that can help you budget if that's something that you're fortunate enough to do and you want to kind of save for that. So look at that ahead of time because that can help set you up. I know you did an episode on childcare costs, so I won't cover a ton of stuff on that, but I will say something I didn't understand is a dependent care flex spending account. So this is something that not every employer offers. Once again, we are fortunate enough to have our employer offer it, but just like your health flex spending, you can put money in there and then it doesn't get income tax on top of it. Mm-hmm. There is a limit. So I think it's $5,000 for a family. So that doesn't cover a lot of daycare if your daycare expenses are, $200 $2,000, $3,000 a month, but there's a little bit of benefit there. And sometimes there's even a small company match as well. So look into that. Not childcare dependent, but you could also use it for like elder care. But even if you're like a stay-at-home mom and have a summer camp and your partner has one of these flex spending accounts, you can use it for summer camp, I believe. So
yes, you can.
Yeah,
I think that's really cool.
That one's cool. Once again, look at it ahead of time. And then
can I ask you about your 529? How did you open that? Who did you go to? What did you do for that? Did your company offer it? Do you have a financial planner? Because that's a lot of people get stuck on these things. It's like, where do you go? They just don't know where to go. What do you do? So how did you do 529? Do you remember?
Yeah. Okay. Great question. So the first thing to look up for is the state that you're in. Are there tax benefits to having your 529 with that state? So I think a lot in the past, it used to be you had to go through your state's 529 to get the tax benefits. I think more states are moving away from that. I think Ohio literally just passed their tax laws to say now you can contribute to another 529
in a different state,
and you can still get the tax benefits. So we chose to do Ohio because I wasn't aware of that law.
Yeah.
But now we're moving to Minnesota, and I believe Minnesota doesn't care what 529 you have. And we actually we started with Ohio and we transferred to Utah because Utah is a state, or their 529 plan is a little bit unique, where you can actually choose some stock investments instead of it be like a target fund. Yeah. So if you're hands off and you're like, I just want to put money in and not think about it, those kind of target funds, which means that they are automatically adjusting it to become less risk adverse as that money gets closer to needing it. A lot of retirement accounts are set up that way. Almost everything offers that, but Utah had a little more flexibility. That said we have a long time before he goes to college, and I'd like to have a little bit more of that flexibility. So we chose to use Utah. And I actually used, I don't know if this is a good tip or not, but all the information is available. I actually used ChatGPT to kind of talk through and said, like, here's my situation.
It's a great tool.
Here's my state. Yeah. Talk to me about the top plans and, do some of that research for me. And then I always went back and fact checked the information I got to make sure that it was still the right choice for us. But I was able to kind of compare plans. I was able to double check the tax laws, and just kind of do some of that preliminary research. So I actually used that as a tool to figure out like which one was the right one for us. But then after that, it's pretty easy. You literally go on there on the 529 site. You put in kind of your information, and then similar to like a bank account, you just deposit into it. Now I haven't experienced what that looks like to withdraw from it yet, but setting it up is actually really easy. You also can do usually auto withdrawals if you want to say, I don't want to see that money. I just want to automatically go in there. And you can often check if this is something important, you check if your states or whatever state you choose has that ability, but you can often have people gift directly into it as well. So
like grandma can put money, or Auntie Jill can put money into Locke's account.
Right.
Cute.
That's so great. Wow.
That was good information. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
I would say another thing to think about is estate planning. So I feel like I'm just bragging about my benefits from work, but we actually have...
You have great benefits. I'm like, wow.
We have some legal benefits as well. So we signed up for a legal service plan. And part of that is that we can do estate planning through that. So we didn't have to go through and find, a lawyer independently. I did just Google it because I think this is something that's people don't think about that you want to think about when you have your child, or if you have a second or third child, you want to update your estate planning documents. So that's like your last will and testament, your living will, your medical proxy, durable power of attorney, your living trust. And the average cost for that was around $2,000 to $5,000. So once again, something to think about ahead of time. You can't update it until after they're born because you're going to need their information. But think about like what, when you want to do that, what you want to set up in those documents ahead of time. And then you can be working with a lawyer ahead of time to say like, okay, once my child's born, we can just fill in that information and have it ready to go. But like the last thing you would want to have happen is something to happen to you. And then not to know, how you're setting up your child for success. Life insurance, something to look at. So you might have had life insurance that, maybe just help support your spouse now if you have a child, or if you move into a bigger house and you want to make sure that like if something happened to me that like my partner could still afford our mortgage, like you might choose to up your life insurance as well. So things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, that you might want to think about when you have a kid. And then, we talked about a lot of expenses today. I think some really good advice that I heard once that I think was really cool is if you're thinking about it and you're not sure, set up a sync fund or kind of designate another area in your account and try making those payments ahead of time. So like if daycare is going to be $2,000, if that, the extra insurance is going to be $150 a month. If you want to put $300 a month into a 529, add up what that is. Take that out of your paycheck, put that aside, and just see how that feels. Yeah. And you could always, before you have the kid, you can always like readjust that money. You can use some of that money towards your hospital bills. You can use some of that money to give you a kickstart while you're adjusting your budget. But like whether it's buying a house, having a kid, some of these big things that impact your monthly finances, just try it out and see what that feels like. So that way when it happens, it's not just like this huge shock, and maybe you'll have a little bit of extra money. So if it is a huge shock, you can kind of absorb that. We kind of did that as well. And I felt like that really helped us out.
That's so good.
My gosh. I feel like you're such a smart parent.
I know.
I need more people like you.
Her to have this on because she is one of those people that research everything, which I think is so powerful when you're planning this kind of stuff. I wouldn't have done the work that you have, and I'm so glad that you have it, and you're here to share this with everybody. Is there anything else you would want to, that was really good advice. Is there anything else you would want to share with listeners or people planning to have a child?
Yeah, I guess, we talked about a lot of things. We threw out a lot of numbers. I will say at the end of the day, everything was worth it. We love our son so much. That smile is worth everything. And I want to do everything we can to take some of the financial stress off of us and set him up as best as we can. I do recognize we are really fortunate to have some of these benefits through our company, to have an income that allows us to save for his college future. And that's not always the case. So, I empathize with that. I think the biggest thing is just, don't wait until you're pregnant. Don't wait until you necessarily have the kid, because when he's there or when she's there, the last thing you want to think about is some of these things. So whatever you can do ahead of time to prepare. I know it's not the most exciting. It wasn't my favorite part of the pregnancy by far. It wasn't as bad as morning sickness, but it wasn't my favorite part. But I'm so grateful that we did. And you definitely don't want to leave money on the table too. So if your employer has some of these benefits, talk to your HR department. And we talked about what worked for us. I threw out some numbers. It's going to be different for every family. It's going to be different for every employer. So I can tell you my experience, but your experience is going to be different. So spend some time, use the resources you have available to you, talk to other moms, talk to your HR department, talk to your insurance department or your insurance company. Figure out educate yourself as much as you can ahead of time, because you don't want to be surprised. You don't want to leave money on the table, and you don't want to be worrying about finances when you're trying to figure out all the other things that come with being a parent. So the more you can do to prepare, that's just one less thing that you have to worry about, and I feel like it was not fun when I did it, but it was totally worth it to relieve ourselves from that stress now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on today. Shannon, it was really powerful. So thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Hopefully this helps some other parents or some other people who are thinking about family planning. And it's really all I could ask.
So good. All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and we will see you next week.
So Jill, where do we go from here?
Be sure to check out our show notes for this episode, and also be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our newsletter. And we'll see you next week.
See you next week.